Welcome, I am Steven. I am one of the owners here at PlanningPod, and today I'm going to show you how to connect PlanningPod to Zapier so that you can begin sharing your data with other applications. To begin the process, you're going to need a Zapier account. You can either create a new one from scratch, or if you already have one, you can just go ahead and log in and skip this step. I'm going to create a new account to show you all the steps involved in getting Zapier up and running. So while this is getting set up, I'll explain a little bit how Zapier works. Each Zap is made up of a trigger and an action that can happen in either one step or multiple steps. The trigger is the part of the Zap that tells Zapier when to take action. The action tells Zapier what to actually do with the information it's been given. You'll see this process more clearly when we actually build our first Zap later in this video. In this next step of the setup process, Zapier is just asking for a little bit more information about you and your company. This information is completely optional. It's just Zapier's way of trying to find out which applications you use a bit more often so that it makes it a little bit easier for you to find. So that's it. We'll finish the setup, and now we're ready to start connecting PlanningPod to Zapier. So the next step is to paste the invitation link we've sent you into the address bar while you are logged into Zapier. This will bring up a page that will let you accept the invite and actually start building Zaps. So go ahead and click that Accept Invite and Build Zap button. The next step is to now connect PlanningPod to Zapier. The first thing you're going to do is click the Connected Accounts link in Zapier, and then where it says Connect a New Account, you're going to search for PlanningPod. Once you click that link, Zapier is going to ask you for your PlanningPod username and password. You can go ahead and fill out that information, and that is what will tell PlanningPod that Zapier is allowed to access your account to begin moving data. If it's successful, you will see in Zapier a new connection for PlanningPod, which you can go ahead and test. So now we're ready to create our first Zap. Click the Make a Zap button to get started. This will bring up the Zap Builder interface. You can see PlanningPod has been selected, and we're going to have a trigger and an action step. We're going to go ahead and select PlanningPod for our trigger. PlanningPod has about 14 triggers. You can view all of them if you click the Show Less Common Options link, but we're going to go ahead and create a new to-do trigger. In this next step, you're going to confirm the PlanningPod account you'd like to use for this trigger. You can go ahead and test this connection to make sure it works, and then continue to the next step. In this next step, Zapier is going to ask you to pull samples from your PlanningPod account to continue setting up a successful Zap. We are actually going to skip this step. To make using Zapier easier in PlanningPod, we've created a 2-hour buffer to allow you to finish setting up or completing information in PlanningPod. For example, you might create a to-do and then 10 minutes later decide to go back and edit it. We really don't want Zapier moving it to another account or another service until you're ready to do so. So for the Zap setup process to run smoothly, we're going to go ahead and skip this step and just use sample data that we provide Zapier so that you can set up your Zaps smoothly. So go ahead and click Skip this step, and then we're going to go ahead and continue with the next process, which is to continue with default samples. Those are the samples that we provide Zapier for you. Your trigger is now set up, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the action step. We're going to connect to Wunderlist, but you can connect to any service you like. The steps are completely the same. For our action, we're going to create a new task in Wunderlist. So go ahead and click Save and Continue. And just like in the trigger step, you're going to need to connect your Wunderlist account. And if you're using a different service, you'll go ahead and connect to that account. So you're going to provide your login credentials for the other service and sign in, and that will let Zapier connect to that service. Each service has its own connection process, so if you are not connecting to Wunderlist, the steps might be slightly different, but just go ahead and follow the prompts to get your other account connected. In this next step, we're actually going to tell Zapier what information to take from Planning Pod and where to put it in Wunderlist or the service that you've selected. Each one of these form fields has a drop-down next to it, and when you click that drop-down, Zapier is going to provide you with whatever the relevant information is for that particular field. You'll see in there either information that's been pulled from Wunderlist or the service you've chosen, or Planning Pod. And you can go ahead and select that information for each field, and that's what's going to tell Zapier what information to take from Planning Pod and where to put it in the service that you've chosen. Let's take a look at how this works. In this first form field, in this drop-down, you see two lists. There's Inbox and there's To-Dos from Planning Pod. This is information that Wunderlist has provided from the account that I've connected to. When you click on these drop-down menus, there should be information in here that you recognize. I'm going to select the To-Dos from Planning Pod as the list I would like all of my Planning Pod to-dos to land in my Wunderlist account. You can go ahead and select whatever you find appropriate in the connection you are making. In this next step, we're going to take information from Planning Pod and give the to-do a name. This is called title in Wunderlist. You can see that this information is coming from Planning Pod because there's a little Planning Pod icon in the drop-down field. I've gone ahead and I've selected the to-do name to map to that title field in Wunderlist. All these other fields are optional, so you have a choice. This will be different depending on your service. We'll go ahead and add the due date here just so that we can add it to Wunderlist. Something else to note in Zapier is that you have the option of turning off actual data samples and viewing the names of the fields instead when you're mapping, if that's a bit easier for you. Once you click Continue, Zapier has all the information it needs and is ready to send a test to the service that you've chosen. You can review the information that you've been given. You can skip this test, but we recommend you run it to make sure that information is moving successfully from Planning Pod to the service that you've chosen. If all's gone well, you should see a successful test message and you can finish your Zap. The last step is to just simply name your Zap. You can name it whatever you'd like and turn the Zap on. Then Zapier will begin moving information from Planning Pod to the service that you've chosen. You can turn your Zap on, and then once it's on, you can click to see it in your dashboard, and you'll see your first Zap successfully created and turned on. Now you might be wondering exactly what happened when you turned this Zap on and ran that test. Well, let's take a look right now. I've got in my other tab my Wunderlist account. So let's go ahead and take a look at what Zapier did. Well, you can see here the to-dos from Planning Pod list that I had created previously, and Zapier has created this to-do with my sample data from Planning Pod. You can see it added the to-do to the list that I specified in my Zap. It added my to-do name, and it also added the due date that I specified from Planning Pod. You can use the same steps as what we've just discussed to make as many Zaps as you'd like in Zapier to connect whatever information you'd like from Planning Pod to the service of your choice.